Good afternoon, everyone. It's 3 o'clock here in the Northeast. What time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. Today I'm going to continue my work on this illustration from Chapter 4 of Dreamside, Book 1. I've done a bit of work on it last night after I signed off. Done a bit more detailed work on it, and I did amplify the background a little bit. I'm not entirely sure that I'm liking the color mix at this point, but I will keep working it until it gets right. Now, what's actually creating this color mix, by the way, is a color overlay gradient, which is right here. I can turn it on and off so you can see what that looks like. So that's without it, and that's with it. So the color gradient adds a little bit of control over the way the colors blend. So you can see in the thumbnail, it's a pretty blurry gradient. And in this case, because the Dream Girl has a sort of rainbow motif, when I'm painting her, oftentimes I'll have a sort of rainbow overlay, which will, in a very subtle way, increase the presence of colors with her, even if they're not directly painted on her. When she's around, you sort of get this spectrum. So that's part of giving her the vibe that she has. So I'm going to do a couple of things today. I'm actually going to leave that gradient on for a moment, and I'm going to do some coloring of outlines. Now, one thing that bothered me about this after I finished last night is I noticed that even though I really want to do this connection here with the vine that brings the images together, the problem I have, as I always say, if you add something, you take something else away. In this case, the problem that I have is because this vine, which is has received shadows, because this vine has some shadows on it, it has some detail, it's kind of starkly contrasted against the white background. The issue is that it attracts our attention. So actually, kind of the focal point of the image right now is this vine right here, this connecting vine. So something which is designed to be sort of a interesting connection point between the two images is sucking up all the energy. And obviously I want the energy to go to the two illustrations. So what I need to do is either cut this vine and suggest that it's connected, like have sort of an end point here where it's growing, and then sort of pick it up over here. Or what I think I might try to do is just basically eliminate the colors on it and just have a very light suggestion of outline. And I think what that will do is take away some of that attention-grabbing contrast that it has. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that right now, and we'll see what we can do with that. All right, and if I think what might be the right choice here is just to break the vine, but you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, I think I'm just going to go ahead and break it, because I don't think I'm going to be able to make that work. It's kind of a cool effect, and I can have it fade out a little bit, as though it continues off the panel a little bit, but I don't know if I'm going to make that work. Hey, Andy, can't stay long. It's your wedding anniversary. All right, congratulations. That's very cool. How many years? So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and eliminate this. Actually, I'll start with the outline for this. So I'll isolate the line layer by holding over the check mark. And I think I'm just going to take out most of this, especially this little busy cluster that I had there. This music is not doing it for me.
Hello guys, this is Amos Style Music, and this is a sponsored video for John who purchased a random service package.
All right. Yeah, and I'm going to get rid of this little bit here as well because it's a little too close to the border or the gutter of the page. So the gutter of the page, which is in the middle, probably, I think that's probably good. Because you don't want to have something that tangents the gutter. So just thicken this up here. One thing I really miss from the walking tablet that I used to use is the ability to do a spring-loaded switch to the eraser tool from the pencil. Because one problem with Procreate that I don't think there's an easy way around this, at least not since I last checked, is that I can't switch to the eraser without having to go to the upper right of the screen like that and click, and then I have to click back to the pen. And I've gotten pretty quick at doing that, but it's still not quite as convenient as what I used to do, which is that I wouldn't have to move the pen. And because I manipulate one layer, rather than just sticking with the pen and just moving through, I'll kind of use the pen and then I'll erase a bit, I'll use the pen and erase a bit. Because of that, I need to switch back and forth quite often. So it wastes time if I have to keep going to click on the button like that. So what I used to do is I would use the hotkeys that were on the walking device. And the hotkeys would let me just hold the button in for the eraser, then I would make my adjustment, right? I would make the artistic adjustment with the eraser tool, and then when I let go of the button, it would spring back to the pencil tool. So that was really handy because then I could just keep the pencil where it needs to be on the canvas, and I wouldn't have to waste time going back and forth between the two. It's not a huge deal, but it has affected the workflow a bit, and not for the better. So that's one thing that I would love to see. I mean, really, in order to do something like that, I think you kind of do need to have hotkeys. Right? You have to have some sort of a hotkey function on the device. And the Clip Studio, I can set that up with. I used on the iPad. The one thing that I could get to work was this. It's an 8-bit. I think it's pronounced 8-bit D gamepad. So it's this little tiny gamepad. It's their 0 gamepad, I think. And I could set it up so that the buttons would have functions within the program. So I could hold on to this little game controller and use the buttons on it as a way of switching between functions. But that doesn't work in Procreate, as far as I'm aware. So I do wish that they would have some kind of functionality for that open up with Procreate. That would be pretty cool. I mean, they would need to add the ability to program functions into different button presses too. So there would have to be some kind of a hotkey editor, like Clip Studio has, and that's probably outside their scope of what they want to do, because it's a very particular need. This is often the problems that you run into with digital workflows, is that there's some particular way that I work that's a little bit different from other people, and the things that I worry about are things that other people might not even think about, and so it's hard for software makers who develop these art tools to make sure that they satisfy everybody's needs. Yeah, I think that's probably better, because that's just gonna get rid of that part that's just really pulling our attention. It's a cool idea, and I think if I had more vines, maybe that would work a bit better. But as it is right now, it's one of the many examples of something that I spent time making that I end up having to cut. Today, like most days, is a killer day for art. I hope everybody's doing something awesome. Oh dear, I noticed my microphone was not on. That's probably a little bit better, right? You can hear me now. All right. So I'm just painting back in the green and the areas that I changed. The problem with these edits, as I said before, it's easier to make them as early as possible. So try not to wait too long. But sometimes, like I said, also, you have to get to a certain point before you even know that something is a problem. It's not always super clear. Yeah, maybe I can connect it with just these flowers. But I'll decide that later if I want to add them. All right, I think that probably changes it a bit better there. Hey, Ken. You think that looks better? That's good. That's what we're going to go with. All right, let me get my shadow color back. I have the most disorganized color palettes. I just look for an open spot and figure out where I can put whatever the current color need, whatever the current color I'm working with, wherever I can stick it, if it's just something that I'm working with in the current page. So I should get a little bit better with that. But there are some colors where I am keeping them consistent between pages. You know, like maybe I'm using a particular shadow color between pages that are within the same scene because it has the same lighting. In that case, I might locate them a little bit easier if I set up a palette. But I'm not going to use that specific shadow color again after that point, so it's not really that important to maintain it. So rather than sort through a million color palettes, I kind of just keep manipulating one. And there are also little other things too, like so many of the colors change throughout the story because I don't have the same colors being applied to, say, for example, Sarah's outfit, because Sarah's outfit changes throughout the story. So there are different colors there. It's not like she's a kind of classically iconic cartoon character that wears the same costume in every scene. Okay, and having done that, I'm so sure that that's a good move that I'm just going to proceed with what I was doing before, which is some of the shadow work on the vines, which is time consuming. It's very time consuming to do these little flowers and, make sure that each one's a little bit varied. They don't look exactly the same. And I'll put a little bit of color variance in each one too, but right now this is, I'm just focused on shadow. So I highly recommend artists that you figure out some sort of a method for drawing without hurting your back, whether now or in the future. And I find that there's no really perfect solution, despite trying just about everything, because at a certain point you kind of have to hunch, right? I think the best solution, if you're going to just be drawing digitally, I hate to say it, but the best solution is to not use a pen display and instead use a tablet. And the reason for that is you can hold the tablet on the surface and keep your arms at a good angle, and then you can keep your head upright looking at the screen. Because the real problem that we run into is that when we're drawing, we're hunching because we have to look down at the paper. And if you try the other way, if you try to raise it up so that your head is upright, then your shoulder is going to start having problems because you have to raise your arm the whole time in order to draw. So, yeah, there's no easy solution. But the tablet, if you can live with that as opposed to a screen display, is a pretty good option. Obviously, right now, I'm using the iPad, which does not have does have a pen display, so it's not. It doesn't apply here. it's very hard to find the perfect combination. For example, if you do say, oh, all right, I'm going to go with the pen display. Well, that means you can't use the iPad. If you can't use the iPad, then you can't use Procreate. So there's a trade-off with anything. But the best thing ultimately for it is not even really a solution for how to sit and or stand or whatever. It's just to make sure that you're moving a lot. I'm not a doctor, but that does seem to be the thing which helps the most. Is just make sure that you're moving a lot, because no matter how you're sitting, if you're sitting a long time, it's going to cause problems anyway. So these are just things to think about, and you're never too young to think about it, because anybody can develop back problems and stuff like that. But that's not very exciting to talk about, so let's move on. I made a tweet yesterday, actually no, this morning, that talked a little bit about art school. And I kind of cut right to the chase of something that I hear a lot from a lot of people who went to art school. I have mixed feelings about art school. Ken Rule says, you try to do light exercises between parts when I draw. That is really good advice. Very good advice. Yeah, the more that you can move, if you can, it's about developing a system, right? If you get a rule that you can get in place that works for you, and you say, all right, every time I reach, maybe it's on every hour, like people suggest, or maybe it's, when you reach a certain point in your the tasks that you're doing. If you have repetitive tasks, maybe you do 5 of them, and then you get up and stretch and do a few push-ups or crunches or something like that, and that will help you, I think. Anyway, I've got some killer coffee here. Oh man, this is good. When it comes to art school, I've got a lot of feelings. I did go to art school. I went to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh. That was a long time ago. I went back in 2000 through 2003. It's the time that I was there. And I had a pretty good time there. And I had a pretty good experience too. But it was for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of stuff that I sort of had to carve out for myself. And this is I'll tell you what is my major problem with art school right up front. The major problem is that I like to think in terms of value perception, right? Like when I'm trying to figure out if something's worth my time, I have to compare it. I have to say, all right, what does it cost versus what do I get? And I think that's a very reasonable perspective that I don't think many people really use when they look into college. And part of that is because college has it has a perception. It has sort of a revered perception that there's just inherent value in going to college. But I don't think that's the right way to think about it when you're an artist. I think I'm actually going to fade this out up here too, because no matter what I do here, this is too strong because it's over white. I either have to pull the background out behind it, which maybe I'll do actually, but that or I have to lighten it so that it's not as contrasty. And I can probably lead with some flowers too at the end of it. Anyway, I'll think about that in a little bit. So I think in terms of value with college, what are we getting out of it versus what it costs? Now, it used to be that college had a very different value proposition, okay? First of all, it wasn't, I feel like it's become more common to have unconventional programs and degrees. Even just going to college to study animation, which is what I did, was pretty unusual at the time. But I think the way that it was justified is you would say, well,
what can a good animation program lead you toward? I mean, what does the school offer, and can it lead to a good job that you would not be able to get otherwise? Now, when I went to school, it was a lot harder to find tutorials online and things that would talk about using 3D software, not to mention just getting access to 3D software. Like, there were so many things that I didn't know. You know, I just knew that I was artistic and I knew that I wanted to do something with that, but I didn't really have access to the tools that I would need. And there was no YouTube. There was really, I mean, in the year, 1999, 2000, the internet was a very different place than it is today. There's no Gumroad. There really is no online education. So there was nothing like that. And so if you wanted to move into like a high-tech field, something that would use a lot of new technology, going to school seemed like a smart plan, especially if it led to getting a bachelor's degree, which mine did. And that's cool. And that was kind of at the time. Now, today, we have a very different value proposition. Today, we have a multitude of competitive options of what you can use to learn this stuff. And so you have to ask the question, what is it that art school offers that you can't get in these other avenues? Because there's no question that it costs a lot more money. I know of people who have gone into debt going to college, to a college that, has cost, maybe over the course of 4 years, it might have cost a couple $100,000, which is kind of ridiculous. I mean, that's just so much money. And so the way that I think in terms of value proposition is I say, okay, well, you're going to take out a loan that's going to pay for that amount. Are you going to be able to turn it around and earn more than that with your degree? Because if the answer to that is yes, well, then it's probably worth it. But if the answer to that is no, then that's probably a waste of money. And especially when you go through and you compare it and you say, hey, look, we have, things like Gumroad. We have YouTube tutorials. We have free software like Blender, which is becoming more and more popular. We have these options that we never had before. We have art software like Procreate, which costs $10. All right. We have these tools that just never existed before. And so, yeah, it is a different value proposition than it used to be. So it's important to weigh all these things together and think, is art school going to be giving me what I'm paying for? But then there's another avenue to this, and this is more kind of in line with what has always been my major concern with art school. And I think a good school is inevitably going to incorporate this in its instruction, but whether or not it's clear about it. And that is that so much of art education is self-driven because it's a skill. You're basically teaching yourself a skill. It's a little bit different than, learning facts and figures. You're not just learning technique. You're also developing technique. And developing technique takes practice and it takes time, and it really just requires you to put your nose to the grindstone, so to speak, and just get the necessary skill development to be able to do what you want to do. So regardless of what you're taught in schools, there's still that point that you have to do where you have to do your own skill development, right? So I can tell you this, there is no program that I can imagine that would ever let you study your way into being a good artist. That doesn't really work. I mean, it's very easy for people to understand if I say it, about playing a musical instrument. It's kind of like at a certain point in time, you just have to, practice playing until you're good enough God, I made the world's worst music choices today. Um, I need to compile together a collection of music that I can play for this that's not so doesn't have so many variations. All right. So yeah, there's a lot of personal skill development that has to occur, and so here's kind of the big question: is the skill development that you develop, what percentage of that which is needed to get yourself into a good position does that personal skill development take up? Because I'm going to say, in my experience, which is now about 17 years worth, I'm going to tell you that skill development is a very, very high percentage. And I feel like that's fairly obvious. You know, if you're going to go to a company that wants to hire people on the basis of their artistic skill development ranks pretty high in that. Okay, and your degree is going to be significantly less important. So here's the next question: is skill development harder to do on your own than it would be if you were in school? And I don't have a definite answer for that, by the way, because there are a few things that happen when you're on your own. It can be difficult to stay motivated. You have to really care about what you're doing. You have to really, really want it. Okay, but here's the funny part about it. If you really, really want it, like enough that you're going to develop the skills that you need to, and you're going to get through the challenging aspects of becoming, you know, a highly skilled artist. If you're that passionate, then you're probably passionate enough that you would do it by yourself anyway. So what I would say is, as I get older, my appreciation for the application of art school as it's traditionally been applied has reduced. I just don't think that when it comes to something like a skill-based profession like this, that art school is, you know, going to school in general, I guess, is really the best use of your time, especially if the value proposition is so poor that you will go into debt for a long time. Because, you know, it's very hard to earn a living as an artist. So it would be all the more irresponsible, I think, to put yourself in a terrible situation debt-wise if you weren't able to earn much. But does this mean that I dislike art school in general? No. No, it's really just a matter of figuring out what the value to you might be. There are kind of unspoken things that are of tremendous value to art school. For example, the community of artists that you will meet, your friends that you will make. That's a big deal. And I still say today that the biggest factor in my ability to get a job, other than my ability to do the work, is being friends with people at the company. Not so much being friends with them, but just being familiar and communicating with people at the company, and having people who are, you know, aware of the fact that I might, for example, be looking for a job at some point, and then they say, oh, you know, let me keep my attention attuned to that, and I'll let you know if anything pops up. You know, it's much, much easier to find yourself in a position professionally if you are friendly with people who are where you want to be. It's much easier than going in and just applying with a resume, because when you apply with a resume, you're kind of starting from scratch. And you know that there are people who are at the company who are probably saying, hey, I got a buddy who's really good. And that person is probably going to get a little bit of preferential treatment in the hiring process, because people who already work at the company are recommending them. These little details inevitably seem a bit excessive, but they culminate. They become worth it because there's a completeness to the illustration. By going through and doing these a little bit differently with each one, even though the line art is similar or the same, it helps them all look a little bit different from each other, which is good. If anyone's ever unsure if they want to be a professional artist, just show them this video of me endlessly redrawing shadows on little tiny flowers, and they'll pick a different profession. This one gets a bit more attention because it's bigger, a little closer to us. This is the biggest one here. Hey, Mary, good evening. Thank you. Kind of you to say. Yeah, I'm working on the endless process of shading flowers. But I've got David Lynch coffee, so I've got a superpower weapon. What's up, Jonathan? I need to talk. Well, as I think of things that are interesting to talk about, I talk about them. And sometimes I just draw. What sort of things would you like to talk about? Your Lord and Savior Bob Ross? Are those one and the same? Bob Ross. That was an interesting man. When I was a little kid, Bob Ross used to be on PBS. I think I would watch Sesame Street, and then occasionally Bob Ross would come on. Yes, everyone who's ever watched Bob Ross knows how relaxing it is to listen to Bob Ross. He had an interesting approach because I think Bob Ross had to figure out how to create a technique that could be demonstrated in a half an hour show, which is funny because here I am just leaving open a live stream for 3 to 4 hours at a time. Really just me drawing. But Bob Ross had to kind of figure out how to make that make sense. And I think the choice to do the stuff that he did probably played. I think the fact that he was limited to that half an hour time slot probably played the biggest factor in why he painted what he did. That's just my guess. Yeah, one thing that I'd like to get set up with at some point is a camera that's actually looking at the iPad instead of doing a screen share like this, because you can't see what the pencil is doing. You can only kind of see things appear on the screen. And it's a bit more interesting, I think, if you can actually see what the pencil is doing. It'll also help, I think, people understand some of the technique. I realize sometimes that as I'm working at something that has a very subtle change on the screen, it might be hard for you to even see what I'm doing, unless it's kind of a higher contrast change. When I'm done with this project, I probably will have painted about 1 million of these. These and other types of flowers. This character does have a sort of floral motif to a degree. The central core uh, structure of her design is that she basically looks like a rainbow. She's like almost like a personification of a rainbow, but she is also this kind of windswept, bird-like character who, she kind of always looks like she's ready to go and fly up into the sky. But wherever she goes, we kind of have these flowers appear. The Dream Girl, in a way, has a kind of fresh growth concept about her in the sense that where she goes, Dreamside is built. And so, because of that, I try and think of ways to visually indicate that makes sense with the story. And so, this kind of natural plant life is kind of perfect because it's pretty different from the clinical setting of the hospital. So it juxtaposes. But it's also, these aren't like very complicated built out flowers. They're more like vines that are growing. They're kind of beginning. It's sort of like new sproutlings. And in that way, it sort of parallels her presence here because this is the beginning of the creation of Dreamside in a way. I tend to not put the stuff into words because it works a little bit better as written in the story. But just to give you a rough idea of at least part of the reason why we see her surrounded by flowers like this. Yeah, Bob Ross seemed to understand that there was a lot of value in just creating things. and showing yourself that you can do some pretty cool stuff. There's a lot to take from that. Because Bob Ross taught in a way that, again, I think it really had to fit the time slot that he had. But he taught in a way that was formulaic enough that you didn't have to think too deeply about what you were doing. I think part of the reasons people get frustrated with trying to emulate Bob Ross is that they would realize that there are these little techniques that he does that even though he's explaining what he's doing, it's kind of hard to do them just as well as he did. And that's because, there's a lot more to it than what he's explaining. But as you practice, of course, you can begin to develop the same skill set. But he did it in a way that I think people who do not consider themselves artists, appreciated, because it put it into terms that was maybe a little bit less, we'll say, I guess it was just more accessible. It was a more accessible way to approach a painting and let people who just would not normally consider themselves painters to take a crack at it. So I think that was pretty cool. I started to do a little bounce light here, which I need to continue. All right, let me color the outline a little bit. Dreamside's art is kind of packed with these somewhat tedious processes because it is a highly polished, highly detailed art style. And unfortunately, there's no other way to do it. So there are so many of these steps that seem to have a minute effect on their own. But seen together, they go pretty far. I'm going over the flowers too, but that's because they haven't really. I'm doing them separately. Since I'm going to go over them again, it's easier if I don't try and dance around the flowers here, and just go over them all at once with the green, because that's the vast majority of what I'm doing with the lines right now is to color the green vines. So it's quickest if I just cover the biggest, widest area at once, and then I worry about the detail stuff later. Yes, I'm going to leave them alone. You are from the UK, aren't you? It's the punniest part of the world. I'm pretty sure that is your prime export. Working on ukulele was funny. Most of my interactions with Platonic resulted in excessive pun use. I mean, their pun skill level was off the charts, and I couldn't keep up. All right, now I'm gonna get those flowers. This is gonna take so long. Hey, Banana Meteor. I was just saying that I need to put the pedal to the metal and hurry up and finish these flower outlines. Not every illustration in Dreamside takes this long, but there are a fair amount that do. I have a habit of overcomplicating them. But that way, every time you turn the page, it's stunning. And there's another surprisingly detailed illustration waiting. Looking great. Pink and green really complement each other. Awesome. Yeah, they do go together. Don't soil the place with bad jokes. It's not punny. Yeah, leave me alone. All right. I am pulling on your leg. Oh my God. Oh my God, I love you. That's fantastic. Keep those coming. to her tree. You know, whatever feels right for you. Just make sure they're not too dirty. I'm trying to grow my channel here. Oh, that's my favorite one. I think you're doing a Vine job. Oh, perfect. Worthy of Platonic. Come on, UK. You got to catch up. The New Yorker outdid you. Oh. Infinity Ink, yeah. It's funny, when you didn't know what it was, I suddenly got very nervous because I couldn't remember if that was something that was not public. And then I had to go and look up on the ukulele wiki. What a time. There are such things as wikis for specific video games. What a time. I would say that inside knowledge is sprouting up everywhere. Mary, Infinity Ink is a reference to something in ukulele. Oh, I've got to color the bed. I think I'm just going to outline it. Yes, the Infinity Ink, what the one book is written with. Yeah, I wondered about those rainbow paint buckets. I'm not sure if that preceded the Infinity Ink or not. because it always seems strange to me that they would have it lying around. All right, I'm just having a little bit more fun. I'm gonna add more color variant to her hair. I think I might have said this before, but it's funny to me, so I'll say it again. That I remember showing these drawings of the dream girl to a friend of mine who is a hairstylist, and I asked her to do something like this. If like a girl came in and said, "Hey, I want you to give me this look with all of these different colors and all these different sections of hair and gradients going all the way through, like what it would cost to do it." And I think she said that it would take days. Probably better off with a wig. But the impossibility of her hair is kind of part of the fun of the character. You know, it's part of what makes her a fantastical character. In this illustration, I have a few more extreme variances in the hair than I do in other illustrations, which is what I'm doing right now. If I turn this layer off, you can see I just kind of have the basic gradient, and I'm adding a lot more tonal variation throughout. But this won't be the case in every illustration with her, because it sort of depends on the scene. In this scene, she's sort of fabricating into reality. So there's a little bit more of a fantastical element to this piece. Banana Meteor says, rainbow hair is incredibly difficult. It's just so difficult to prevent the colors from muddying. Yeah. It would be awesome for like one day. Well, there you go. All right. Somebody get this hair and then take a picture. When she's not there, her hair goes brownie green, and she spends hours getting it rainbow to meet up again. Yeah, that's when she's off camera. Since I have more color happening around her, I need to make sure that I intensify hers a little bit so that she pops back out again. So you got to maintain that contrast. Yes, her poor hairstylist. Wonder if she goes and sits down and just says, "Give me the usual." That'll be $10,000. Just look at the funny thoughts that would not have even occurred to me if I wasn't on a live stream with you. Yes, keep the quips coming. I think it's time to add some shine. I've got to add a little bit of shine to her hair. I started doing it. Well, if things don't work out, I'll become a hairdresser. Moana level of shiny. I don't know about that. I gotta look into that. It'll be this level of shiny. Do I plan on producing extra Dreamside merch just like Cracklestone? Yes. Any ideas? Yeah, I think with Kickstarters, it's a good idea to have extras because, you know, I'm an honest person. So I just tell you what I'm thinking is that extras encourage more backing. And when you're selling a book, it doesn't really, the book on its own, unless you're selling a lot of them, it doesn't really bring in an awful lot of money. Not compared to the time that's spent on it. It's kind of funny because I was looking at one point into doing art prints. Well, more than one. More than one point I was thinking about it. And the funny thing about an art print is that depending on how you have it priced, if you did kind of like a really nice high-end art print, you could basically sell it for the same price as a book. But an art print might be something that that maybe it'll take a week to make, whereas a book will take a long time. So it's just funny when you think about it, that there are these different things that you can sell that will have basically the same expected cost as a book, or will take a lot less time to produce despite that. So having extras is cool. I mean, I know that as a somebody who really enjoys this stuff, and I like supporting other artists who are making this kind of thing, and it's always cool when there's a really neat extra. I do think that sometimes extras can be a little poorly thought out. And I want them to be something that's really cool. I mean, one thing that I was thinking of having produced, but I don't know if it really makes sense for a variety of reasons, is to actually have like a necklace dream prism, which I think is a really cool idea. But there are a few problems with the dream prism. I don't know. You can offer your perspective on this, but the dream prism itself is, it is designed for story reasons to look the way that it does, which is really just kind of this rainbow cone. It's not terribly exciting, and it's also not something that is all that practical if you were to wear it as a necklace, because it's kind of thick, And so I had thought about doing something that's more like a flattened version of it, and maybe even one that has like the wings from the logo. And that could either be like a necklace charm, or it could be like a pin as well. So that's something that I'm thinking about doing. And if it is a pin, there are some, or really, a pin or a charm or whatever, something really cool is I can get some very cool effects on it. Like I can do, what's the term I'm looking for? The kind of rainbow effect that you get. Iridescent. So I can make the thing have like iridescent effects that will create little rainbows all over it. And things like that I think are really neat, especially if they have a story tie-in, which that obviously does. So I would love to produce a figure, but I think that's more for the future. That might be like a future campaign, like for one of the later books, if it's successful. I would look into a figure. But like doing a vinyl figure with the characters or a resin statue or something would be very, very cool. But it wouldn't be cheap. It would be a high end extra. You know, I mean, kind of like what I want to do with Yuka. That might even be its own campaign sort of thing. So I don't know about a figure. But things like pins are always cool. People seem to really like pins. They're very collectible, and there are certain things that are easier to produce than others, and there are certain things that are surprisingly expensive. I think that people kind of dug the collector's coin from Yuka, but I don't think that's right for Dreamside. So I probably won't do something like that. But if I were to do something like the coin, it would probably be something closer to like the Dream Prism as jewelry or that sort of thing. But I like the extras to be things that are practical and or something that you would actually want to display. Things like bookmarks are obvious options. Book plates are cool because you can put them in the book. Art prints are neat, but one of the problems with art prints, and they're great to produce. They're fantastic from the creator end because they're easy and they don't cost a lot of money to make. So if you're trying to raise money for something, they're good to produce. But the problem I have with art prints from like a fan perspective is I don't know that people ever really know what to do with them. Because it's like, do they love it enough that they're going to hang it on the wall? I mean, some people will. I think one of them's here actually. But unless you make something that's kind of big, it doesn't really work very well being hung on the wall. So that's kind of challenging. So it's like if they're small enough that they're not going to require like a different shipping container, which is a huge expense if you have to ship things in separate packaging. So art prints can be kind of difficult to really excite people with, because they're just not, I don't know. They're neat, but I kind of feel like I'd rather make like physical objects, things like a pin or a keychain or something like that. So yeah, if you have any great ideas, let me know. That would be helpful. Mass chonk. I wouldn't worry too much about the level of thickness. One of the most popular video game merch necklaces is the Stardew Valley Mermaid pendant, and that boy is chunky. I have to look into that. Are merch necklaces is that a thing? Like actually having necklaces? Because it would kind of be perfect for Dreamside because Sarah has this necklace. It's this really important thing. I mean, the way it ties into the story would be like, it would be like the bell from the Polar Express. It's got a very strong tie into the story. Focus all that figure energy on Yuka. All right, that's the plan right now. You prefer to hang originals? Yeah, makes sense. Polar Express is amazing. Yeah, that was I remember that when that book was sold when I was a kid, it was often sold in a package with a bell. And I think that must have really increased their sales. Because the book sort of makes the concept of receiving this bell mean so much more. So if you read the story, it's like there's something about having the little bell yourself that's really neat. I'll look into the necklace. I think that's kind of a good idea. It's not something that I think too many of my male readers will be that excited about. But I don't know that Dreamside has too many male readers. When I first put the video series up online, it was funny because I really had no idea what to expect. I've always had trouble kind of understanding what's going to be more popular with different groups, because I like everything. So in my mind, if it's neat, I like it. Like I don't care if it's like if there was a really amazing Barbie game, then I would be into it. So I like stuff that's neat and well made. And so I think when I launched Dreamside and as the video series before, I really had no idea what to expect in terms of its kind of the demographics that would like it. And so people would ask me every now and again when I would talk to people in publishing, for example, who's this book for? And I'd say, I don't know. It's for me. But when I went on to Facebook, now Facebook actually gives you a creepy amount of information about people that have your page liked, which I didn't ask for, but Facebook just gives it to you anyway. Facebook is kind of the king of creepy social media platforms. Anyway, so when I had the Dreamside page, I think it was both Facebook and YouTube was giving me information, because you can go and get like the analytic information for videos, and it will tell you, now I don't know exactly how they compile this information, because I don't know how they know who's who unless they specifically say it. And also that's assuming that they're telling the truth. But anyway, assuming that their algorithms were correct, Dreamside, like any Dreamside related content, I think it was 99% female. And I think it might have been like, I think the age group was 17 to 24. So I joke that Facebook determined the audience for me. So I guess that's who's reading Dreamside. So I probably shouldn't worry too much about that. Demographics are annoying because they and kind of reasonably get in the way of just making what you want. And as an artist, I'm very selfish and greedy about what I make. I want to make exactly what I want. When I wrote Dreamside originally, it was back in 2004. And at the time, I thought having a young girl as the main character was interesting, because there wasn't a tremendous amount of media at that time that had young girl protagonists. I thought that was kind of interesting. And there's a reason. The Dream Girl is a girl for a totally different reason, but just having Sarah be a girl was just kind of, I just thought, this would be kind of interesting. So because it was a lot less common, today there are far more female protagonists, I think. And so it's not quite as exciting as it was at the time. It's not quite as different. So that's the problem if you wait too long when you have a good idea for something. Eventually that good idea will be done. and will be the norm or something. So I thought that was interesting. I think when I was a kid anyway, and this hasn't really changed since, is that I never really cared if it was if the protagonist resembled me in terms of its relatability. You know, I thought, oh, I can empathize with anybody if it's well told. If it's a well told story, I can find any character interesting. In fact, I would often like to get stories that had characters that were very different from me, because I always thought, well, it's kind of more interesting for me to read stories about characters who are different than I am. It's fun to read about me, I guess, but I'd rather read about you. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to stretch the artistic and storytelling muscles to choose a little girl protagonist, because it's kind of the character that is most detached from me. You know, it's like it's extra challenging. Put myself in that state of mind. You think with the two female main characters, vibrant colors, I'm definitely appealing more to a female audience. Yeah, that does seem to be the case. Yeah, girl representation in the 90s video games was particularly nightmarish. It's one of the reasons I really latched on to Kazooie. She didn't... Kazooie! That's smart, Alec. She didn't prescribe to the prominent pink or feminine ideals of the time. It was kind of funny because whenever you did do something that was a little bit, I guess when you had a studio that will think a little bit outside the demographic information, and they say, hey, let's try and expand, and appeal to some other group. It is interesting when they start kind of thinking in somewhat cliche fashion about those characters. So, you would get great characters like Kazooie out of that. All right, I'm going to try playing this. And if YouTube yells at me, nothing beats Chrono Cross for Dreamside work. What's up, Cabbage Head? Is there really anything more fun to say than Cabbage Head? I think maybe Tater Tot Tunes has you beat, because I cannot get enough of saying Tater Tot Tunes. But Cabbage Head is pretty good. Yeah, I think for me, it was just an interesting combo, and I wanted to tell this story, and this story had two girls. The dream girl being a girl is there are far more significant story reasons that she's a girl. But the Sarah was really just chosen because I was intrigued by the idea. As I said, I think I said yesterday, the Studio Ghibli catalog had just started being ported over by Disney back in 2003, 2004, thereabouts. And Miyazaki was known for choosing female characters in lead roles, which I thought was interesting. And the characters in his movies are really intriguing. They're very deep characters. It was just intriguing. It was kind of just the norm at the time that if you were going to make a story for kids, which Dreamside was originally intended to be, hasn't really changed, I guess. But Dreamside does have some nightmarish elements to it, and I'm not pulling punches with it, because it's so there's a fair warning, because it's I've been thinking about it for so long, and it's been in my mind for so long, it doesn't really surprise me. But then I remember that people who are not me don't know what I know about the story, and it's pretty intense. There's a lot of nightmarish imagery. There's no violence really. There's nothing like that. But there's horrifying imagery in it. There's some stuff that I think if you scare easily will kind of stick in your mind a bit. Because Sarah has these nightmares with this monster that she calls the Gray Dragon, and the Gray Dragon is just it's just a scary, scary monster. And one of the things that I do to kind of make the character a little more frightening is I'm very interested in horror. I've always been a big fan of horror. I like fantasy, I like comedy, I like horror. the one with the tanukis with huge balls. That is Pom Poko, and I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. I love it. I love it. Hello, Hot Buns. Silver medal for most fun thing to say is okay. That's right. Spirited Away in Mononoke, fantastic. Yeah. Oh, Mary, you've got to see more. You've got to watch more. They're just their experiences really. They're strange, and they have very strange pacing for films. I mean, they're not as weird as Takahata's Ghibli movies, which are. I'm going to be honest with you. I almost prefer Takahata's movies to Miyazaki's, but they're extremely unconventional in their pacing. They move at a speed that's just all over the place. And a little bit of what I talked about yesterday about kind of living in sort of a euphoric environment. I think that Miyazaki has been doing that for years. So some of his movies they'll spend a long time just kind of enjoying themselves and taking their time with scenes that are showing stuff that really they're not greatly contributing to the central plot, but they do have the character. It's world building type of stuff. I can think of lots of examples. I mean, in Kiki's Delivery Service, there's a scene where she's helping somebody bake a casserole. And it just, the amount of time that's spent showing the process of doing this, or in Howl's Moving Castle with the breakfast scene, which is so memorable. It really, there's a lot of time spent just kind of living in that environment. And it's a very intriguing thing, and something that you'd never get away with in a kind of traditional Hollywood setting, because it would be seen as an overlawn scene. It would be seen as an overlawn scene. So yeah, it wouldn't really work. But at least Miyazaki has allowed that to kind of become a bit of a norm in the way that he thinks about storytelling, and you can really sense that he seems to be just fine with making these scenes that are so comfortable. You want to basically live there, and he just draws them out like that. He's not afraid to extend the scenes like that. So that's very interesting. Yeah, he nails atmosphere. I think that's a good way of putting it. Hot Buns loves horror. I'm going to call you Horror Buns. So yeah, I think when it comes to horror, what I love about horror is that I'm a bit of a moralistic storyteller, which I know is the worst thing ever to people. But if it's done very well, what I'm really saying is that I like stories to be about something. And horror is one of the greatest examples of that. It's almost horror stories are almost little parables in nature, and they present these extremes. And what I love about the extremes is that extremes allow you to see with great potency the message that's being presented. And obviously horror, it heightens your senses, and it makes you very open to the concepts that are being presented. So I like what horror can do in that regard. And I have a great love for horror. And I like all kinds of horror too. I like anything from kind of the more, we'll say, cerebral style of horror to slasher 80s movies. They're all very interesting to me because I like anything that can kind of create a strong emotional reaction in the audience, and nothing does that quite like the power of comfortable fear, in the sense that you're not really afraid. It's a movie, it's scary, you're worried about jumping, you're worried about being caught off guard by some loud noise, and something that will kind of sit in your mind while you're trying to sleep. But really, it's a fun scare. So it gets the senses up without you having to worry about being in danger. So I love horror for that reason, and many others. My favorite horror of any kind ever is Silent Hill, which is the Silent Hill 2 is still my favorite video game. Which still surprises people when I tell them. But Silent Hill 2 is, in my opinion, the greatest example of video game storytelling that I've ever seen. Because it incorporates player action and choice into the way that the story is communicated. And I wouldn't dream of spoiling it if you haven't played it, because I think it's the greatest game story. Really, I think it's the greatest game story I've ever seen, despite the cheesy components of the acting and things like that. Just incredible stuff. So I'm very inspired by Silent Hill, very inspired. And you'll find a bit of that referenced with the Gray Dragon, that has a number of surreal components to it. I find that the scariest kind of horror is always going to be that which can come from a place that you can't really identify. It's not necessarily alien, but something that is you can't narrow it down to a logical source. And in that sense, it becomes very off-putting because you don't really know what to expect. If you can kind of break the rules a little bit that people come to expect about the way the world operates, and you can do that in a fiction setting, you can create, very strong horror. And so Sarah is terrorized by a very powerful fear. And that fear resonates. It's just, I don't want to get into it on the live stream because it's a primary story component, but there's a very, very strong component to what really scares Sarah. And it's not exactly what you think. And it's personified in a way in her own dreams, and comes out as this sort of monstrous creature, which has since been redesigned, by the way, although I haven't shown it off. It's much, much scarier than it was in the video series. But the dragon has certain interesting components to it. It doesn't have a purely recognizable, consistent form. And so you can't really nail it down. You can't really say, okay, I've got an understanding of what this monster looks like. And that lack of anchor points, as I call them, creates fear, because it comes from a place of uncertainty. You don't know how dangerous the thing is. You don't really know what it is. You don't really know what it looks like. You just know it's scary and you kind of want to get away from it. So that element of fear is very strong in Sarah's dreams. And the reason it's so important to have that kind of thing in Dreamside, as well as any story, I think, is if you provide a very powerful and potent darkness, you can then contrast it with an incredible light. And the light is less appreciated without the darkness. So if you want to make something look bright, it's like, this is rule of thumb as you can get for artists, is that you have to work with contrast. If I make a very, very bold pink color that I want to stand out, I want to make sure that I put it, adjacent to a very dark, dull color if I really want it to pop. Because only through the contrast can you really see it. It's the same reason that you can look at those pictures that show a gray square adjacent to, surrounded by different tones, different values, and then the gray looks totally different. It's because it's all because of contrast. And contrast is, of course, not just an artistic, in terms of the visual imagery, it's not just an element of visual imagery, it's an element of the storytelling as well. Contrast is very, very key. And so just within book 1, there is quite a lot of contrast in what Sarah experiences. And actually, this page that I'm working on right now takes place after Sarah has experienced one of the nightmares. It's actually the morning after. But the dragon is not a creature that Sarah wants to be around. Junji Ito, yes, I do like Junji Ito a lot. I first discovered Uzumaki, I'm going to say maybe about 8 years ago, I think. Probably at this point, it was about 8 years ago, which is the first thing that I saw of his. And I had just seen a few pages, I think, that were shared on social media. And then I went in and discovered his catalog of books. Pretty awesome. One of the things that I love about Junji Ito is that he understands the same reason that, I really love horror, but I also really love comedy. And I think that they have a lot in common, horror and comedy, because both create heightened senses, sort of heightened states of emotion. And you can really impact people when you have a strong, heightened sense of emotion. Have you ever noticed sometimes that comedies make you feel the most emotional? When they have those scenes that, things kind of come together at a certain point, and it seems overly emotional, and you're not really sure why, because it's this goofy story that's making you get emotional. Well, I think part of that is because when you make somebody kind of crack up, if they're laughing a lot, it is a heightened state of emotion. And I think that sets the stage to then hit with something powerful. Again, by contrast, if you contrast the comedy with something that's emotional and powerful, then it will resonate. Same thing happens with horror. So I think in a way they're similar, but Junji Ito seems to understand how to make things kind of scary and funny, because there's a lot of Ito stuff that is it's exaggerated in a way that seems to know that it's kind of silly, and yeah, it can be really scary. It can be funny too. And I don't know too many comic artists or manga artists who are able to do that so well. Kind of simultaneously create something that's horrifying and also makes you kind of crack up a little bit. I think his book, I think it's Cat Diary that he did, is a comedy, but it has some really grotesque elements to it. some of the drawings will, they're a little hyper exaggerated, and so you get those kind of, they're grotesquely exaggerated expressions that just give you chills when you look at them. But it's a comedy. The story is funny. I'm probably going a little too far with these highlights, but I can pull back on them. It's more just that I have to find places to emphasize them, and then I can pull back on the intense usage so that there's not too much. Mary likes to draw horror, but can't do films and games. That's all right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, it's Dreamside is an extremely uplifting story. It's not designed to be frightening, but it has frightening elements, and it's all about getting that contrast in there. You're going to appreciate so much about Sarah's adventure because of the challenges, and along the way there will be so much enjoyable magical stuff that it's just a rush. But there's some things about what Sarah is dealing with that are so challenging that they can best be represented by an almost kind of demonic monster. I don't make it easy for her. But it wouldn't really be a hero's journey if it wasn't challenging, right? And it rewards you as the reader. There's so much to this story. It's not a rushed concept. It's long, it's epic. There's a lot of thought behind it. So it definitely rewards the reader. But yes, there are plenty of wholesome elements as well. Mm-hmm. One of the more fun aspects of the story, which is very has a lot of it's really not brought out much in the first book, but it comes up later, is Sarah's relationship with her dad, Vincent. And that's a lot of fun because Vincent's position and his having to kind of deal with this situation is kind of it's tragic, but it also it has elements of I hate to say this, but it has elements of humor too, because he's so ill-equipped to deal with this kind of challenge. And the way that changes his relationship dynamic with Sarah is one of one of the more fun aspects of the story to write. Because Vincent and Sarah have a lot in common, but they also are very different people. So it's not the easiest thing in the world for them to bond. But bond they must. Without getting into spoiler territories, there were things about Vincent's life and his relationship with Sarah that were very different before the story. And there were certain things that he took for granted that have kind of crumbled apart. And so there's kind of a, if you get too much outside of the realm of normalcy in your life, it can really shift the gears a little bit and make things a bit confusing. So Vincent is kind of like a lost lamb in the story. And so he's an interesting character. He's all the more interesting because of it. And it does lead to one or two funny scenes. Because Dreamside is not by any means a comedy, which I'm okay with. Very different from Yuka in that regard. There are moments of levity, for sure, but it's not a comedy. It takes itself a little too seriously for that, which I know is another storytelling sin, but it's what it is. Good to see you, Mary. Thanks for coming by. Thanks for all the puns. That was a lot of fun. So easy to get lost in kind of fixing these tiny little errors. I'm pretty well convinced that nobody will notice, but just in case they do. Do I plan to ever create another Yuka book or marathon my Dreamside series? Well, when it comes, I mean, yes, I do. I would love to make another Yuka book. The problem is, I actually do have a story for it that I love and has, as far as I can tell, mostly been approved. The problem with it is I can only do so much myself. And I also there are a number of projects I haven't really talked about. I mean, one thing that I kind of alluded to is I've alluded to one other story that I'm just not really talking about right now because I thought that at one point I actually thought that might be next. So I was kind of throwing out some hints on social media about it, but that one's been shelved. Is written. is good to go, and I really like it. And then I've got another brand new concept that I wrote, I'm going to say about a month ago, which I really like. It's gaming related. It's a series. It would be just awesome. And so the problem is I have a number of things that I want to do. And then there are also some other studios that I've been talking to about doing game books. Like a book based on their game. So there's a lot of stuff that's in the pipeline, and there's just only so much time. So one of the reasons that I decided to proceed with Dreamside is because no one thing that I was counting on was definitively ready to go. And as much as I wanted to do another Yucca book, I didn't want to jump right into it as my second project because I didn't want to just kind of be the Yucca book guy. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I want to branch out and try a few different things because you never really know what's going to stick. And there is something very nice about doing your own stuff, if you can make that work. Because, of course, that's something that I have control over. But Dreamside is also something that I wrote so long ago. It's been in my head for so long. It's kind of that inevitable project that just has to get done. And I've just gotten so used to it just never being done that I really want to give it a try. So it's a real challenge because it's never easy to sell like an original IP on Kickstarter like that, because I'm not coming from any fan base. It's just me and what I can generate and hopefully what I can pull from the Yucca backing. But it is a very different project, So I'm hoping that people will come back and support Dreamside, and I can hopefully retain as many of the backers from before as possible because it's definitely going to be my main outreach is to people who have already backed. And we'll see how many new people we can pull in. But the nice thing about Dreamside is it doesn't have to make quite as much money as Yucca. I've changed the way that I'm working with book printing, and there are a few things that are different now, and so I'm a little more flexible. So it will likely have a lower goal than Yucca did. I don't know exactly where it's going to be, but it's probably going to be closer to around 20K, which is half of what Yucca was. So that will, I think, help a little bit with that. And if it's successful, there's always the chance that Dreamside will be inordinately successful, in which case, I have a pretty clear answer that I should stay focused on that and work on the sequels. But if Dreamside just kind of barely makes it by, or if it's not successful at all and it really doesn't work, then I kind of have my answer about where to put my focus. I'll still work on Dreamside, but it will be relegated to be more of like a passion project that I work on as I can. And then I'll have to switch gears and work on something else because that's just the way it goes. And so then we'll kind of re-examine what's coming up next. But just one thing at a time at this point. And then we see how it goes. The books aren't terribly long. In the original draft, they were. They were closer to about 160 pages or so, but there was going to be 3 of them. And I've changed that because it allows me to get the books done at a faster rate. So if they do release and people kind of get into it, because when you get to the end of book 1, it's really, you're at a position where you're really going to want to jump right into book 2. And it's going to be like a year. Probably not a year if I go, full blast on it, but it's going to be a while until the next book comes out. So, my hope is that it does well enough that I don't have to spend time working on really anything else. And then I can just focus on this and eventually get to the point when I can maybe get some help, to get more projects made at the same time. one thing I brought up in the past, not too long ago, is just the idea of doing overlapping campaigns, which is would help quite a lot in letting me get more stuff out. Because if I'm not stuck waiting until fulfillment occurs for whatever the current project is, there's a lot of time in manufacturing that I could be spending, getting right on to the next thing. And so people aren't really waiting as long, and I'm able to produce a lot more content that way. All right, that hair is looking pretty tight. I actually do kind of like a funky iridescent effect on her. How did you put it? Flare socks, and the armbands that she has. It's white, but I'm kind of playing with some different materials that will look a little bit different in different lighting. So that could be really cool if I can pull that off. But I'm not going to do that right now. Flare socks is a backer add-on. Yeah, you could just, you know what? I'll just have a Dream Girl costume. How's that? So we'll have a wig. We'll have flare socks. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I need to get a little bit richer with these shadows. big shadow covered areas like her back here are great opportunities for getting some bounce light in there. So reflect some of the blue from the mattress onto the back of her shirt. Getting a little bit of bounce light in there just helps kind of make the whole thing come together, because it's very easy to think about the individual elements of a piece as disparate and kind of disconnected. But if you can start to bring the colors from one section of something into reflecting off of the other elements within the scene, then you really give people the information they need to understand that it's adjacent to it, it's there, it's existing in the same space. And of course, I exaggerate a little bit with the bounce light, But if you're out on a bright sunny day and you say you pick up like a really intensely colored flower and you hold it under your palm, so your palm is facing away from the sun, but the flower receives the light, then you'll see that intense, vivid color reflect up onto the underside of your hand. And that's a really cool effect to get in your art if you can. So there are quite a few opportunities for that kind of thing. So I do actually have a bounce light here. It's right here. Just want to isolate the region here. And as I said, I'm exaggerating it a little bit. I mean, this kind of looks like she's over like a pool of water, but it's cool looking. As long as it doesn't go too far, as in it's hurting the clarity of the image, which can often happen too, because if you're eating into the shadow part of something, that's a part that's supposed to be darkened. You're now making lighter, so it's important to make sure that it's not pulling away from your contrast needs. So try and make sure that that's not You're not going too far with that. And also bear in mind that this happens significantly more in bright, sunny scenes. So if you're in a darker scene like this actually is, you're really not going to see this happen too much because the light has to be pretty intense to begin with. And certain materials will do this more than others. Skin, for example, is a little bit more reflective than, the fabric, for example. That's a good example of, doing it in an area where the bounced light would almost become like a light source that projects up. These white armbands that she has reflect this lighter tone onto her leg because they're adjacent to her leg. I'll do the same thing for like the underside of this, because her skin color is going to project up onto the underside of the socks. I call them boots, but there's nothing over her feet. To bulk out the outline on her back, just because I need a bit more strength separating her from the background here. sometimes the answer to this kind of thing is just bulking up outlines, because it's an interesting thing when you have outlines, because when you just have tone, when you're just working with color, you have there's really just two areas, that can be next to each other, right? You have, like, say, a light tone next to a dark tone, and that's it. And that's how you develop your contrast, which is fine. But when you bring an outline in, you're introducing a third method of separation, right? So you can have like two shapes that are next to each other that could both be colored the same, but they'll be separated by the outline, right? So if there was no outline, you would have to make them slightly different colors in order for them to stand out. So outlines also can have a danger to them where you might not create the sort of value contrast that you need for clarity within the piece, because you're relying too much on the outline. And then if you don't have enough of an outline, then you can have a bit of a problem. So outlines kind of help us cheat. And that doesn't always work out. And that's part of the reason that I go in and bulk things up a little bit here and there. But I also like providing a little bit of sort of a gradient within the line itself, right? So it's not just one tone. I'll kind of go over here. This is a pretty cool effect where I'm kind of overdrawing the line into the piece just a little bit, but with a softer tone than the outline. This is one of the things that you get as a possibility if you're working with a pencil style outline instead of a hard ink outline. Because with the hard ink, it's if you're going full just pure black outline, then if you expand it, it just gets to be a thicker black outline. And that doesn't really allow for the sort of subtle details where the line breaks into the black of color. So you can see how I can fade the outline out because it's more of a softer pencil. And that lets me bulk up the edges of things and kind of clarify shapes where I think it needs it without going too far. All right, I'm going to add some fun to these flowers here, which are really bland. Now, one of the cool things about this is because I've gone through and taken the time to keep them on separate layers and be organized, it's a lot easier now for me to come in and just alpha lock them. And then I can do things like this, where I do like a gradient effect on them. Because really, is there anything better than color gradients? I don't think there is. All right. Keep forgetting I've got to connect these flowers to the vine. So I think this this is probably going to be the last step before sign off here. So what are we thinking about this? I think it's a pretty big improvement from where it was before, that's for sure. All right, I'm pretty happy with where that is right now. All right, so I'm probably going to call it quits here for the live stream. So thanks again for coming. As always, it's a great time. Thanks for all your insight, all your ideas, and all your advice. And we have to get together again soon and see how everything's progressing. All right, so thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.